If you need a budget, but need a little bit more guidance than just pay yourself first, or just spend less money, you might need this video. I'm going to take you through 7 steps to make an actionable budget plan that doesn't micromanage your life. You can follow along on a piece of paper or a spreadsheet of your own, and if you want to use a budgeting spreadsheet that I prefer personally, you can use the one I linked in the description. Step 1. List out your income. The purpose of budgeting is twofold. First, we're trying to spend your money more intentionally. Second, using whatever funds and situations you have available, we're trying to create a cash flow surplus for you. And our cash flow refers to the difference between how much money is coming in and how much money is going out. This is why you need to list any income you have. We're going to list income on a monthly basis from any source. And if something isn't a consistent source of income, either average the total you've earned over a year and divide it by 12, or if it's not a major source, just don't include it for simplicity. I would not include dividend income from your equities if you plan to reinvest dividends. And if you're not invested in anything, just don't even worry about that. Step 2, list out your expenses. It's time to figure out how much you spend in a month. In the budgeting template I've included in the description, you'll see a list of some common expenses people have, just if you have some trouble thinking of some expenses yourself. And once you write down some of your obvious expenses like rent, utilities, groceries, etc., you'll want to find some of the more niche things that you forget you spent money on. One quick way to find your expenses is by going to your banking app and asking whichever AI assistant they have there to show you what your monthly spending is. Even if your bank doesn't have an AI assistant on its app, there's usually some form of cash management feature that can track and itemize your spending. And if you can't find that, you're just doomed. I'm kidding. Sometimes you can go back to your card or your account statements to find your history there. For most people, spending isn't always the same month to month, so you can get an average of about your 3 to 6 months expenses and get an idea of your typical spending behavior. Step 3, making your savings goal, then listing some priorities. Now that you know what your income and expenses are, you should roughly know what your cash flow has been in the last few months or so. Now determine what an acceptable cash surplus should look like. Also known as how much do you want to have left over every month to save and invest. If you already met your acceptable threshold, congratulations. I mean, you can still continue because budgeting can help you spend your money more intentionally, and there might still be some value for you here. In this same step, you'll also want to make a list of at least 3 of your spending values. Your spending values, for the purpose of this exercise, are the ways you want to spend money effectively to bring value to yourself and others. Examples could be, I want to make sure me and my family are healthy, or I like to spend on travel and experiences, or I like to use money to free my time, or I value losing my money on Polymarket. There's a lot of possibilities, just try to get 3 down. Step 4, sort your expenses into either fixed expenses or variable expenses. As I said before, you're going to want to organize your expenses into 2 columns, preferably. The 2 columns are called fixed and variable. In my budgeting template, you can see how I clearly separated them into 2 columns, but if you are using a paper, you could just mark them as fixed or variable, that's totally fine. But you'll see why I separate them into 2 columns later. So fixed expenses are expenses that are the same dollar amount that occur in regular intervals, like month to month. These are typically your subscriptions and bills, things like rent, gym memberships, insurance payments, HOA fees. Whereas variable expenses vary month to month based on your total consumption and usage. Good examples of this are your groceries, unless you get a grocery subscription, your entertainment spending, shopping, eating out, gas to some extent, and utilities like electricity, water. Categorize your expenses now. Go do it. All right, step 5. Classify your expenses as either primary or secondary. Now we're going to add an extra label to your expenses within the columns as either a primary or a secondary expense. I don't like labeling the expenses needs versus wants because of how subjective the definition of need can be. Mark your most important expenses that you don't want to alter, if possible, as primary, and mark expenses that you could either cut out or cut down as secondary. Reference the spending values that you wrote down in step 3 to help you realize which expenses are important to you and your values there. Step 6, now we're going to go through our expenses. We're going to draft a plan to reduce them so that you meet your cash flow goals. Before we continue, look at your variable expenses and add them all up. Take 15% of that sum and then add that number as an expense we're going to call random stuff I didn't plan for. You're going to budget with that 15% margin in mind now. We're going to start with your secondary expenses. Go down each of the columns and look for any low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit will refer to any expense that just sticks out like a sore thumb, makes you say, gosh, I surely can easily reduce that unnecessary expense that I'm paying way too much for. Choose your expenses that you would like to prioritize reducing based on the spending values we created in part 3. A quote I really like from Ramit Sethi, a small finance content creator, is spend extravagantly on the things you love and cut costs mercilessly on the things you don't. For fixed expenses, they're usually tied to some sort of bill, and you can either decide to keep it, reduce it, or eliminate it. For variable expenses, it's not as simple as just canceling a subscription. You actually have to make a plan because this is a lot more habitual. If you're trying to reduce a variable expense like eating out, you have to set yourself an actionable goal. For example, I will eat out once a week and spend no more than $30 on each outing. For groceries, it could be something simple like, I have $120 to spend on groceries every week. The trick is to be selective about reducing your variable expenses because it's hard to change all your habits at once. But if you can focus on a few categories like eating out, clothes, medieval swords, etc., you can laser focus reductions to your impulse spending. Now we're going to go over your primary expenses. Since these are primary expenses, you can't just eliminate them outright, but you might be able to reduce your spending. If you already are meeting your cash flow goals by adjusting your secondary spending, you may not even need to touch your primary expenses. Step 7, we're going to stick to the budget. Now we're going to go through actually how to stick to your budget. For fixed expenses, it's very self-explanatory. You just change whatever subscription or bill that you mark for change. But for variable expenses, this is usually where most budgets go wrong. And in step 6, I've touched on this briefly, but you needed to make action plan for your variable expenses. Specifically the ones that, you've decided you want to reduce. Let's recap what an action plan should be. First, you need to identify a specific variable expense. The expenses you choose to reduce would be in line with your spending values that you created in part 3. Second, you set yourself a dollar limit, either weekly, monthly, or yearly, depending on what the expense is. Third and last, set yourself a frequency limit if applicable, so that you reduce the amount of times you expose yourself to spending on this item. Altogether, aim to lock in and follow 1 to 3 action plans at a time to avoid overcomplicating your budget. And if you find that simply trying to stick to that action plan isn't enough for you, you might need to make some changes to your unconscious spending habits. How do you do that, you might ask? My answer is to make yourself a difficult consumer and an easy investor. A lot of people spend lots of money because they're just not selective consumers. They might look at high prices and say, oh, that sounds like a good deal. Then there'll be people that'll look at a mildly reasonable price and go, I would literally never buy that. When you can get a reasonable product at an extremely low price, your perspective on what a fair price for that product looks like begins to drop lower and lower. And as a result, you'll be revolted by the notion of paying retail price for a lot of things. Some of the best ways to inflict this mindset on yourself is to actually try cheaper alternatives for common products you need. Switch up the grocery store, try thrifting or buying used, or simply forgo the need of a meaningless but expensive luxury that doesn't add any meaningful value to your life. Well, I'm preaching to myself. Not everyone needs to make so many drastic changes to their spending habits, and there are cases where people's circumstances are truly tough. They're not able to make so many more cuts to their life. If you know that's not you though, consider inflicting this mindset of frugality on yourself and become a tough consumer. Part of being a tough consumer involves also being an easy investor, which comes with valuing the fact that money can be used to make more money. When you realize that money can be used to multiply itself, there is now this opportunity cost to spending it on things that only mildly benefit you. You would rather make sure you have an emergency fund or to put that money to work in the market. And this gives you an incentive to protect your usage of money. I also want to add a disclaimer that I don't think this mindset should dissuade us from being generous with our money to people. Some of the best investments we make are in each other, and without getting too deep into it, these tend to be the best ones we make. Alright, to sum up all the steps, we, number 1, listed our income. Number 2, we listed our expenses. Number 3, we made a savings goal and listed our priorities. Number 4, we sorted expenses into fixed or variable columns. Number 5, we classified expenses as either primary or secondary. Number 6, we went through our expenses and made action plans. And number 7, we actually carried out our budget and stuck to it. Going through this whole process, I hope it helps you create a budget in an organized and effective way, and hope to see you in the next video.